Hi there, my name's Vince. I'm a video game composer. I'm probably best known for my work on games like Jurassic World Aftermath and Shadow Point, but in this video I'll be talking about a track from Get Packed, which was released recently on the Nintendo Switch. After demoing a little bit of the track, I'll go through the different instrumental groups in Logic so you can hear them in isolation and hear how they work together. I'll just talk a little bit about my reasoning behind why I made the decisions I made in relation to the gameplay and the story and the context. And then also in the later part of the video I'll get a bit more technical and talk about some of the music theory aspects so that maybe there's some little nuggets in there that you can take away and use in your own work. So without further ado, let's get into it. Get Packed is a couch co-op game similar to Overcooked or something like that, where you have to play as a removals team and you're getting the items out of the house and into the back of your van as quickly as possible, trying not to break too many things in the process. It's got quite an irreverent feel, both in the story and in the art style, but it's got a really nice spirit to it. There's this wider story as well about the members of this town, DITCHLINGTON, that you're trying to help out, and this sort of evil corporation that's trying to take over the town. The setting of this particular level is the suburbs. It's this big house and there's this woman who kind of lives alone with all of her cats. So you have to deal with the cats and you have to deal with her. She's always trying to hit you with her walking stick. So that adds an extra complication to the gameplay. So lots of fun things to base the music off. So as I've done before on these videos, I'll just play through most of the track. I'll skip through a little bit so you can get an overview. I'll also put a link to the full track in the video description so you can check it out without any commentary or talking. So that was all our intro. Now we're into the meat of the track. So I'll just skip ahead a little bit. Move up a tone. So structurally this is similar, but we have a different top line. Again, going up a tone. And then after all that's happened, we reach a kind of breakdown section. Gets really chaotic. And then we're back into this feel again. And it sort of basically continues like that to the end. And then when it loops around in game, rather than looping to the very start of the track, it actually loops around to this more high energy section. It loops around back to here. Rather than going right back to the beginning to this kind of feel. And so that's important so that there isn't a massive drop in the energy when the gameplay's happening. So that's something that's determined by the way that it's set up in Fmod, which is the software that I use to control how the audio is triggered in the game engine. So what you just heard there was the mixed version of the track. Now I'm going to go into my Logic session, so you might hear, if your ears are very good, you might hear slight differences between what I just played and this version. But fundamentally, the arrangement's the same and the balance is roughly the same. So in terms of the overall character of the instrumentation and the sound choices, it's really eclectic, but it kind of is based around a couple of different genres that have been mashed up. So the core of the sound is this quite suburban pizzicato and mallet. So I'll just play a few instruments from that kind of group. We've got harp, got piano and celeste, strings. You have this almost like 1950s kind of orchestral vibe. It sounds a bit like a sort of drama comedy TV show, sort of Desperate Housewives-y. So that's kind of there at the heart of the track, but at the same time, obviously, we have lots of other elements. We have a lot of cat-related sounds, obviously. We have elements that almost sound kind of a bit EDM-ish, so some of the beats in the drums section are very heavy, especially this riser. And then we have a 4-to-the-floor kick drum, so that kind of thing is more from an electronic music genre. One of the other sounds within the drum stem is almost more of a rock-inspired kind of acoustic drum sound. So like those toms. So you have that kind of almost indie rock, heavy rock kind of sound in there. We've got this kind of squelchy synth bass thing going on. I guess to me it sounds quite video game, sounds quite kids' TV almost. And then the other group of sounds that we have is what I like to call Grandma's Closet. Something that almost sounds as if it's been sampled from old classical records. So if I just play this section here. So that's got a definite gramophone sort of style. So I guess in my imagination, this is the sort of thing that the old lady might have been listening to in her spare time. So there's this overall concept of genre mashup for sure, but at the same time, quite a core identity still around this fairly suburban sounding thing, but just with a massive twist on it. You're grabbing loads of different items from loads of different categories and just shoving them all in the back of a van. So it has this kind of chaotic feel already. The game as a whole, you're jumping from haunted house to alien crash site to prison to all sorts of things. So the game itself has a kind of mashup feel to it. There definitely needed to be a paciness to the track, which a simple, light, kind of orchestral thing might have struggled to achieve on its own, so there was that consideration as well. Let's just go through a few of the other tracks. So you've already heard some of the meows and the string machine. So we have some more naturalistic sounding strings. They're mostly samples for the weight and size of the sound, but there's also a solo violin in there, which makes a really big difference to the clarity and also adding some of those solo violin flares that you might have heard during the piece. So without the live violins, it sounds like this. So it's not bad, but it just sounds so much better with the live in there. In this section, we have a few more additional, quite natural sounding parts, a marimba and some woodwind. Quite loosely programmed. So I haven't really gone to town in terms of controlling the velocities or the micro timings of those. I wanted to keep things quite nice and loose. So let's just hear those in context. We got some harp glisses in there, just kind of classic transition moments. Just gives it that really instant, recognizable orchestral sound. It's quite low in the mix, you can hardly hear it, but it just adds an extra wash of colour. I'll just play that again. We have some tubular bells, again very much out of that suburbia sound world. Sounds a bit like a doorbell. Book of Mormon style. We have this combination of piano and celeste here, really nice kind of soft sound. So here I was going for something almost sickly sweet. You know that scene in Harry Potter with Umbridge and all the cats on her dishes on the wall, that kind of vibe. So it's almost like disgustingly cute. And the way that I got that sound is using this plugin by Pianotech. It's a little bit old now, but I'm sure you can probably do the same thing on their latest version. I just brought the impedance and I think it's the string length right down, and you get this sort of sound. What else do we have? In red here we've got our drum and percussion parts, including this purr, which I'm considering as percussion. It just felt like a fun thing to do to try and construct some beats using cat sounds, so that's what I did. Let's hear a little bit more about how this drum arrangement is working. So you can hear how I've got very tight cutoffs there. On its own it sounds a bit weird, but in context it just helps to clear out the mix a little bit, so that there's still a bit of daylight between the rhythmic values. You're not just filling up every piece of space and making it into a big mush. That's always the danger with this kind of complex arrangement. These are live drum fills recorded by my friend Harpool. We spent quite a few takes getting that kind of clumsy fill thing right, and I think it works really well in the final mix. The idea is just to have everything right on the cusp of falling apart. It sort of just sounds like somebody falling down the stairs. One of the more egregious elements in this percussion slash drum part of the arrangement is this techno loop, which just has the classic filter on it that changes over a period of time, so you can see it moving here. We also have a similar thing happening on that drum fill. I think that's probably one of my favourite sounds, is the sound of just natural organic elements being filtered. So you have this really nice combination of complex and rich sonic textures, but then this really aggressive filter, so the whole thing just feels like it's being molded and manipulated in real time. So it has this kind of artificial and magical element that really sits on that boundary line. We also have a cat hiss sound as part of the percussion. I think that is just me going into a mic. I'm not sure how many takes it took me to get that one right. Probably too many. One of the elements that I quite like about this drum beat in this part is the use of a little sort of whoosh sound just before the snare hit, which kind of knocks the beat slightly off balance. The way that I like to work when programming this type of beat is to play everything in more or less by hand, but work with these sort of little chunks of time, which I then will loop. So I can be quite loose within that chunk, but then by copy and pasting it, you get a much more consistent thing on the bigger picture. One other thing to point out as part of this percussion group is the use of timpani, just to accentuate certain parts of the musical phrase structure. And again, that's just another thing which is making the whole thing sound quite eclectic. So to summarize, the way that the percussion and the drums are working in this piece is that we have quite a ragtag bunch of different instruments from different categories, if you like, some from the classical world, some more from electronic music, some from rock, but hopefully all working together with some kind of sense of unity of purpose. And so musically and sonically, we're still filling out all the parts of the frequency spectrum that we need to fill out. So we've got punchy low end, and we've got some nice spicy hats on the top and all that kind of thing. And then the other thing is the way that these sounds are programmed, it's a real mix. Some are bang on the grid, like the 4-to-the-floor kick drum. Others, we spent a lot of time trying to craft a sound that was beautifully off-kilter. Let's have a look now at the bass parts. Depending on what device you're listening to, you may or may not be able to hear this. I would recommend headphones if you're able to. Something just very nice about that kind of do-it thing that, I don't know, something about sort of floppy ragdoll physics, and I don't know, there's just something very enjoyable about squidgy low-end noises like that. All of these sounds come from Trillion by Spectrasonics, which is a great bass plugin. Unfortunately, at the time of creating this, I didn't have my Moog Sub 37 here, but this is a set of sounds that's very much inspired by what this can do. So let's hear it in context. And the later section. Pretty weird. Hopefully in a good way. Okay, so we've talked about all of the main instrument groups now, so let's go a bit more into the harmony and some of the music theory behind the piece. So fundamentally, we're in D flat major. So in the opening section, we have something like, which is basically a variation on, which is more what you'd expect, but we're going down a semitone in the right hand, or a half step if you're from the United States of America. So we're going D flat to C. Basically, part of the reason that works is because you're implying an A flat sharp 5 chord, with the E being the sharp 5. Although I'm actually just playing the C and the E there. And this is happening in the marimbas. So let's just play the opening section and listen specifically to the chords and the harmonic movement. So to me, there are two main parts where the harmony deviates from what you'd expect. There's this part. And there's this part. And what's happening in both of those cases is that we're implying a C major harmony when previously we were in D flat. And that's why it sounds a bit weird. It sounds like you've suddenly gone off topic and you're singing a different song, and then it suddenly lands back into the song that you were singing previously. And the reason you can kind of get away with that is because it's a very strong melody line, first of all, so the ear can kind of follow what you're doing. It just sort of sounds off. And also, you're not very far away from the home key. You're literally just dropping down a half step to C. So, and then you're back to D flat. So what's happening is you're going from F to G to C, which is the 4-5-1 of C major. And then you're just stepping up one more half step to D flat. And so that's how we get there. So what we have so far is fundamentally a kind of umpa in D flat major, very simple, with some kind of harmonic twists and turns that just keep sort of pulling you away slightly and then pinging you back into D flat major. And what the melody is doing is this very simple outline of a D flat major chord, very bright, very simple scale. It almost has a slightly naive quality to it, I would say, quite childlike. Then moving on, we just take the whole thing up to E flat. So rather than going to the 4 or going to the 6 or some other chord, I decided to just move the whole thing up a notch. And that has the sort of emotional impact of just bringing the energy up a notch as well. Overall, harmonically, in the big picture, we're generally going from D flat key area to E flat key area, and then we're dropping down subtly back to the D flat key area, but hopefully in a way that doesn't drop the energy. And then we're going up to E flat, so you have this constant feeling of as if it's just going up and up and up, like that optical illusion by MC Escher, like the never-ending staircase. One of the things that gives us a feeling of development, even after we've come back down to the D flat and we're sort of repeating that section, is first of all we've got a development of the melody. So a new melody comes in. Instead of the bum bum da da da, we've got the ba 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 ba, which has a bit more energy and excitement to it in itself. And also in terms of what that melody is doing harmonically, it's implying a dominant seventh. So it's resting on that B natural in the D flat, which already gives it a bit of an unstable feel, rather than just a simple. Now we're at bit reminiscent of the Saber Dance from Khachaturian, absolute banger. Go check it out if you don't know it already. You probably have heard the melody. Also a bit reminiscent of Rhapsody in Blue. I have absolutely no qualms about ripping that off slightly. Let's move on. So let's just have a quick listen to that mallet line that happened, because I think that's quite interesting from a harmony perspective. So what's happening there is it's coming from a place of Lydian dominant. When we were in E flat before, it was more of an E flat major kind of sound. Now we're in this kind of sound world. So this is called a Lydian dominant scale because it's got a dominant scale as part of it. Also called a Mixolydian, so that's essentially a E flat major scale with the dominant seventh added, a D flat. And we've got the Lydian element, which is the sharp 4, in this case an A natural, which gives it a slightly whole tone kind of feel. It kind of lifts it up rather than just with context. As opposed to E flat major. It just has a slightly more fruity quality to it. So again, it feels like a development of the harmony, and in general it's adding more tension. So it's just making us kind of go a bit more again. So you could think of the E flat Lydian dominant as essentially a kind of E flat major plus, or just an E flat major with a bit more spice, some extra sauce thrown in there. There we have a classic use of whole tone scale. Really useful scale for this style of music. You could also think of a lot of these Lydian dominant and other motions in the piece are almost like little fragments of the whole tone sound world that are just being sprinkled in. Whenever you hear something that just seems to kind of pop out slightly, often it's something out of the whole tone mode. So what on earth is happening there? The short answer is I don't really know. I'm not sure. So this is the most atonal and the most dissonant harmonically and the most floaty section of the piece. The bass parts have kind of gotten a bit more unstable. There's a lot less low end and a lot less of a feeling of foundation. The drum parts have stopped. The 4 to the floor kind of kick drum stopped. All of that is just kind of adding an interruption. So this is like the most chaotic area. In terms of the general harmony, it's still what it's always been. So it would be an E-flat part of the harmonic structure here, where we've been oscillating between D-flat and E-flat. It would just be a standard E-flat-ish section, and we do have certain parts that are still kind of clinging on to that E-flat for dear life, as it were. So the string line, for example, it's actually pretty similar to what we've heard on previous repeats of this. So the strings are actually pretty much consonant and in E-flat-ish. What's actually throwing the ear most is this rather odd pizzicato sequence. So essentially what it's doing is taking a little fragment of an idea and then moving it up and then moving it up and moving it up in a way that's quite unconcerned with the rest of the harmony. It's just going up. It's a bit like one of those risers in trailer music or EDM that just kind of goes just to create a kind of tension. All it is a movement. So I'm not really worried about what notes mean what in what harmonic context. I'm just thinking movement going gradually up here. And all of that's clashing against the more stable harmony and the more traditional harmony of the sustained strings, which we played earlier. And then in the bass, we have something else that's in a sequence that's going down. And to be honest, I just had this sound in my head kind of loosely that I wanted something that felt like just a lot of jumping around in the bass. So I had that. I was going quite instinctively at that point. For me, it's best to just think of it as another gesture. I just wanted something kind of plodding and with loads of space so it would sound weird in the low end that had some discernible sequence. So here the discernible sequence is that it's going down. It's like boom, 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 boom kind of thing. So just have another listen. So to me, there's like 3 groups, bum, boom, bum, bum, boom, bum, bum, boom, bum, or something like that. Actually, I think what's more important than the pitches there is the rhythmic interplay between the parts. So you have things kind of ticking along like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's as if the bass is hearing it in groups of 3. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then it's doing a 2 against 3 pattern. Da, 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 da. So just have a listen to that. So again, the purpose of that is to create even more mixture and interplay of different elements to really bring it to a climactic point before it all hopefully lands and resolves in some sort of way. And we hear this familiar melody again in a slightly different orchestration. So there we've subverted the listener's expectations by transforming the second repetition of the melody, just the second half actually, and stretching it out, but in a way that's still rhythmically on point, even though it's not what we're expecting to hear. The melody notes stay the same and the number of notes stay the same, I think. But we've got this weird metric modulation happening. So rather than grouping into 2 or 4, as we have been doing for the rest of the piece, we're actually now going to group into groups of 3 between the clicks. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that new will become our grid for this second half of the melody. So that bit is actually based it's being placed on those new grid lines rather than the old 4 grid lines. So if we just listen to it again. Dugga-dunk, dunk, dunk, dugga-dunk. So that's how that's fitting in there. We've got a similar thing happening with the bass in this section. So this, again, it's in a 3 grouping. That's how it's landing. It's not landing on the grid lines that we had before. Although at the very end, it returns more to the previous feel, which lands us in the next section. That section is also harmonically out, which is why it sounds even weirder. And so we've got multiple elements. We've got harmony, instrumentation, and timing, and all these different things, all being weird in different ways. We're using all the different tools at our disposal to be weird. So why does that sound so good? Dun dun dugga dun. So one of the reasons why that works, at least to my ear, is that it utilizes a kind of cliche, dun dun da da dun, which is a kind of funk cliche. It's actually a cliche that's very special to my heart because it's a lick that me and my mate Rich, who plays bass, used to jam around that lick quite a lot, and we always used to sneak it into our solos and kind of give each other the nod. It was like our version of the lick. So harmonically at this point we're in D flat-ish, believe it or not. And the lick that's being played is actually an E flat, roughly speaking. So it already pops out of the texture because of being raised a tone above the rest of the music. We're here. So we're hearing that implied. And then it repeats half a step down. It doesn't quite do the whole repetition, but it gets cut off. And then it essentially does a little lick. Implying an E dominant chord, which is what's getting us to the E flat, which is where the track's going to move to next. So yeah, just to summarize this kind of theory part of the video, the harmony is actually quite static. We're not going around the cycle of fourths or anything like that. So I think part of the reason that I wanted to keep it fairly static is because there's already enough complexity in the arrangement. It also just helps it sit back in the mix in a gameplay context. You're not constantly having your ear dragged back like, where's the track going now? It's hopefully not too distracting. Some of the ways that we're spicing up this static harmony are things like half-step transformations, where we're just moving things away by half a step and then coming back. In the later section, we're getting a bit more interesting. We're using some Lydian dominant type tonality. We're using some whole tone tonality. I don't get overly caught up into justifying what every note is doing. Actually, in terms of the riffs and the melodies, I'm mostly hearing them in my imagination, singing them against the track, and then playing them in, transcribing my voice. That's how I tend to work. In this later, more chaotic section, we have various things that are just throwing us for a loop, including metric modulation, where we're switching momentarily to a grid based on 3 rather than on 2 or 4. We're also using a technique where we're much more concerned about big gestures, such as these rising sequences in the pizzicato string or the descending sequences in the bass. And then you've got the strings at the top, which are just kind of holding down notes that are related to the harmony. I think that kind of way of thinking, where I'm almost letting go of harmony and theory, and I'm just thinking in terms of movement and motion, that's something that I utilize a lot in my own writing. Similarly, it's the strength of that melody in the odd little lick metric modulation, the bum bum ba-ba-dum, that lets us get away with the fact that it's chromatically displaced. The ear is still hearing that very strong shape, so we're thinking about gestures and movement much more than individual notes. So that's the end of my track breakdown. Thanks very much for watching. The game Get Packed is now available on Nintendo Switch, as well as Steam, Xbox, PlayStation, all the usual places. And if you'd like to have a listen to the track in its entirety, I'll put a link in the description below so you can hear it without any chatting over the top. And if you enjoyed this breakdown video, then I've done others like it. You can check out another one here. I'll put a link. And all that remains to say is give the video a thumbs up on your way out. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you on the next video.